I don't think people understand this continuum of if you don't vote every time, not just every 4 years, but every time, you are not voting for your senator, who in turn are the people who are confirming Supreme Court justices, who are in turn making all of these decisions that affect a woman's body, who can bake a wedding cake, whether or not people who love each other can be married. And if people don't vote, they are ceding that vote to somebody else who is voting, and somebody else is making that decision for you.
Hi, I'm Sally Christensen, the founder and CEO of Argent, a women's workwear brand. And this is Work Friends, a podcast for those who take their work, but not always themselves, seriously. Work Friends. My next guest is Melissa Winter. She's someone whose career is so remarkable, and yet, from an outsider's perspective, it's not always easy to spot her incredible work. In fact, that's kind of the point. Mel is the chief of staff to former First Lady Michelle Obama and has been for the past 7 years. She joined Mrs. Obama's staff 17 years ago when President Obama was a senator in Chicago and would go on to serve all 8 years of the Obama White House administration as deputy chief of staff. Since 2017, Mel has moved away from a public servant role and started a new chapter, working closely with the Obama Organization, Higher Ground Productions, and When We All Vote. Mel is the ultimate get-it-done professional who ensures everything in the background operates smoothly so her principal can also meet her goals. I'm honored to have her with us on Work Friends and so excited to share this conversation. Now, Melissa Winter. Hey, Mel.
Hi, Sally.
Welcome to Work Friends.
Thank you.
You know, we love to start with an icebreaker. So we're gonna start with an icebreaker. And I feel like I'm gonna learn a lot today, which I'm looking forward to. Tell me about your first job, your worst job, and your dream job.
My very first job was at an ice cream parlor. It was a summer job. It was a good job because where it was situated was on the corner of the street, and then across the street was the nicest hotel in La Jolla. And over the summers when I worked, all the valets were the hot surfers from La Jolla High. So in that sense, it was a great job. It was also the worst job because I gained like 15 pounds that summer because you eat ice cream all day. And I got mono that summer. But that's nobody gets mono anymore, do they? You never hear about people getting mono.
I think they do.
Do you?
I don't know, but I think so.
That was all that first summer. Lots of ice cream, gained some weight, looked at hot surfers all day long running around, parking cars.
Is that where you grew up? Where'd you grow up?
So I was born in Chicago.
Yeah.
But the weather finally just broke my parents, and we moved to La Jolla, California when I was 9.
Okay.
So that's really, my mom is still there.
It's funny. I applied for multiple ice cream jobs and never got them.
You couldn't get an ice cream job?
It was like the hot, I don't know. It was a hot job on Hilton Head Island, South Carolina.
Yeah.
In hindsight, like it's not a job that I really want to
It's
scoop
the
ice
best
cream.
and the worst
is hard.
job. It is hard. And, you know, you sort of build up muscles on only one side of your body. So that's uneven too. But really, it's all about the landscape. I mean, if you're just isolated, it's not a great job. But ours was a good job.
Your worst job?
My worst job, I worked for 1 year on Capitol Hill for a congressperson who shall remain nameless and miraculously fell off of my resume. So it's like it never even happened. That was not a good year.
Your dream job, something different from what you're doing today?
I haven't had that. You know, I'm a unicorn in that sense. I've had 3 jobs in my life, one for, 7 years, one for 10, and now going on 17. So all of them have been great. I have loved all 3 of my major jobs.
If you weren't doing them, what would you want to be doing?
Publishing. I would 100% be in the book industry in some way.
This tracks.
Yeah.
We share a love of books.
We do.
Okay, now I want to go back to the beginning. So you first came to DC as an intern in college.
Yeah.
And in a pretty unplanned way.
Yeah. So I'm very linear, except for there's sort of 2 places where I wasn't. My brother was a poli-sci major. And he had gotten an internship, and it was part of a program, which my mother paid for. It included living at Georgetown and the program and the internship. And then like 3 weeks before he was going to leave for DC, another internship that he had applied for told him, hey, you got the internship and we'll pay you. So he's like, well, I want to take the paying job. And my mom's like, well, I just paid $3,000. So Melissa, go to Washington. And I'm like, I wasn't registered to vote. Literally back then, I think it was maybe my junior year. I couldn't tell you with a lot of confidence the difference between the Capitol and the White House and what went on. I mean, that wasn't my world.
What were you studying?
Art history and French. Like I had a whole different situation planned out. So anyway, I took the internship mostly because back in the 80s, you could drink in Washington, D.C. at 18. So I'm like, let's go to Washington.
What?
So the drinking age was 18. It was a sunset law. And it was about to sunset out, but I was like getting in under the bar. So Richard, my brother, and I, we each had our own internship programs. I went back the next summer. It was so fun. And that's what started the whole thing.
And what were these internships?
So the first one, I worked for a congressman from Texas, a guy named John Bryant, nicest guy in the world, Democrat. And then the second summer, I loved it so much that I wrote his office. I'm like, I'd like to come back. I'd like you to pay me. I'd like to be the intern coordinator. And then I wrote the program and said, can I be an RA? I'd like to live for free. And I'll run the weekly, program, which was basically going down to the liquor store and getting, a keg and then having a conversation with everybody. But everybody said yes. So I went back the second summer, lived at Georgetown, and worked again for John Bryant.
What gave you the gumption to ask for all those things? I love it.
I don't know.
Were you nervous at all in asking?
No,
just confident?
I had a good relationship with everyone in the office, and I'd stayed in touch with them to some extent. I mean, back then there was no phone, there was no, email or anything like that. This was still the dark ages. I assumed I either called the office manager, this woman, Carol, who was lovely, or wrote them a letter or something. But I think I had just had such a great experience that first summer. It really opened my eyes to something I didn't even know. I didn't know government service existed in any way. It just hadn't touched my life.
And then beyond your internships, then you decided to return.
I mean, at that point, I was so far down the road with my degree in art history and French. And I also sort of had that wired, like I was tutoring a bunch of dopey hockey players in French and stuff just to get a little more cash and stuff. So I needed to stay in that world. And I didn't want to change majors, but I also knew the day I graduated, I was moving to DC, and I did. One of the friends that I had made who was in my brother's program got there ahead of me. She got us an apartment. And I think I probably had my first job within 2 weeks of moving to DC.
So you moved without the job?
Moved without the job.
Mm-hmm.
Back then you took a typing test. There's all sorts of really kind of low-level things. But I think because I had had an internship for 2 summers already and I knew my way around the Capitol, I think I had a leg up. Mm-hmm. And I got hired by a guy named Norm Mineta, who was a wonderful congressman from Northern California. And I stayed with him for 7 years.
And what did the evolution of that role look like? Starting, I imagine you're just doing menial tasks.
I was the receptionist.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is I loved being the receptionist because I got to talk to everybody and I got to give some tours. And, over time, I think he sort of wanted to promote me or move me. And I really was reluctant because I had my little fiefdom, which was the front office. And, I knew there's all these sort of nuances of working on Capitol Hill. And one of the things is furniture. And there's 6 different color blues. And I was just focused on getting all of the furniture in our office to be the same color blue. So you get to know all the guys who are in the engineers and the superintendents. And then you start making trades and you tell them you need 2 chairs like this and a blue. And you come to work the next day and miraculously those chairs appear in the front office. I was having fun and I was sort of mastering my own little universe. Eventually, I got promoted and agreed to become his executive assistant. And then he decided after that big coup with Newt Gingrich and the big upheaval that he was going to leave Congress in the middle of his term because the Republicans had taken over. So he took me with him and I went into the private sector with him and I lasted 5 minutes. I hated it.
Did you have to move for that? Or
no,
did you stay local?
We stayed local, but he went to go work at Lockheed Martin and he was doing transportation work there. I was loyal to him,
mm-hmm.
but I realized I didn't move to Washington, D.C. to work for a huge defense contractor. I moved here for public service. So I stayed with him a year. I got him organized and set up. And then I went back to Capitol Hill. It was my love.
What was the calling to public service, though? Wait, does that date back to any experience you had in a younger age?
It really doesn't. It was organic to those first 2 summers when I was an intern where I realized, especially in the House side, more than my experience on the Senate side, there is a direct connection between members of Congress and their constituents. And there are real tangible things that you can do for people that change their lives. There's things like you have to get congressional recommendations if you want to go into one of the service academies, or a lot of people were trying to find lost medals, from World War II. There's Social Security issues. There's real life things. And I was floored by that. And one of the things that I did as a receptionist was open mail. Back then, it was actual mail, and mail got delivered twice a day in these huge stacks. And I would read everything. And you really get a sense of what's going on in someone's congressional district because people are writing in about small things like crosswalks and obviously much bigger issues. And I loved it. And I felt a real connection to the people of San Jose, even though I wasn't from there. And, I went back every time he was running for reelection. I would take a leave of absence and go back and help get him reelected.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And go on the campaign trail?
Go on the campaign. We were doing phone banks and lit drops on people's doorsteps. It was real grassroots. You go out there and you're door knocking and campaigning.
Yeah, it's funny because I think back to that age and it's not too dissimilar. I had like a printout of graduates from Furman, which is where I went, and handwrote letters and maybe wrote some emails if email addresses existed.
Yeah.
I was probably at the end of handwriting letters.
Mail, yeah.
But I think that you don't go into a career with any real experience. Like I waited tables, aspired to scoop ice cream, worked retail.
I would have brought you into my world.
You would have hired me. I'm a great employee. But I just wanted any job. And so I think that's like similar to sort of what you fell into. I just wanted to work. Like I wanted, and I know that I'm a good employee. And I think I could have gone a lot of different directions.
Exactly. I could have fallen if my brother had fallen into something else.
Totally.
I could be a docent at the Smithsonian. I could have been anything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're generally like intellectually curious.
Yeah.
I have found that about you.
And like you, I want to do well at whatever I do. Yes. I want to show people what I can do.
Yeah. And I'm like genuinely fulfilled just from being in a role that I feel challenged in that I didn't know about. And without the perspective of, for me, I went into banking in Chicago, got my MBA, went to Cisco, worked in supply chain. But without those experiences, I wouldn't have known what career paths existed.
Totally. And supply chain must help you a lot now in this job.
Theoretically, it does.
Yeah.
I know what we're doing wrong.
Okay.
And then 17 years ago,
yes,
you met your current boss,
I did.
Mrs. Obama. Can you tell us a little bit about that first meeting and how you were connected and what was that leap like from the work you had been doing?
So I'd been in the Senate at that point for a decade working for Senator Lieberman, who was just the nicest man. There was a group of us, 4 schedulers. So myself, someone who worked for Chris Dodd, Hillary Clinton, and Alyssa Mastromonaco, who worked for Barack Obama. So once a week for 1 hour, the senators adjourned to their respective party caucus lunches. And it's the only time someone like me, who was an executive assistant, could be away from the phone because I knew he wasn't going to call me. Somebody else was getting him lunch and they were going through the schedule. So the 4 of us would meet for lunch every Tuesday from 1 to 2. And Alyssa just started going in on me. She said, look, I think my senator's going to run for president. His wife is going to need someone. I'm like, girl, you want me to leave the United States Senate, where I have a great job, to go work for this man's wife, and his middle name is Hussein, and Hillary Clinton's going to run again. Like, there was nothing about this that made sense. I also had a great life. I loved my job. I loved my friends. I owned a home. Like, she just kept at me, and she finally said, just let me fly you to Chicago to meet her. So I fly to Chicago, and Alyssa is like treating me like we're going on a date. She got me the nicest hotel room. She took me out to dinner, plying me with vodka tonics and sushi and the whole thing. And so we go out to Michelle Obama's house in the South Side the next day. And to this day, I don't know what happened there, but she just sprinkled her magic dust. And I loved everything she had to say. She's so grounded, and she was so clear about, I'm not really into this. My husband would be a great president, but we're not playing. We're going to do this once. He's not going to be one of those guys who runs for president every 4 years. One shot. If America's ready, I'm in. If America's not ready, I have a good life. My kids are happy. And I came home and quit my job. And Joe Lieberman didn't even know I'd gone to Chicago for the weekend. So, I gave him 2 weeks notice.
Was that hard?
It was awful because I loved him.
You'd been with him how long?
10 years.
So you did 7 with
7 with Normanetta,
Okay.
10 with Joe Lieberman.
Okay.
But also like with Senator Lieberman, he was family. I had
Of course.
helped with, his youngest daughter's bat mitzvah. There was a wedding. Like I was in that family and they are lovely, wonderful people. And I felt bad, but I would have felt bad anytime leaving him. But I also thought in the back of my mind, this is a great opportunity. He's going to lose. So I'll go back and I know Joe Lieberman will give me my job back, which I felt fairly confident he would. Life
Never went back.
I never went back. And I moved to Chicago. I had my mom go out ahead of me and help me find an apartment while I was packing up and sort of ending things in the Senate quickly. And then I was the first person to work for her, and I was in Chicago by February of 2007. And it was just her and I for the first few months. We didn't get another staffer until April.
Before we get into onboarding with her,
Yeah.
I do want to talk about leaving your previous role.
Yeah.
It's one of the most important phases of career because
Yeah.
I think you can leave on a good note regardless of what the reasoning is. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
So I've left 3 times. Leaving Joe Lieberman and leaving Normanetta, those 2 in particular were like sort of severing a limb. And it was super hard for me. I never would have left Congressman Mineta had he not gone to Lockheed Martin. But
Yeah.
I couldn't live like that. The Lieberman thing, I was sort of hedging my bets because in the back of my mind, I thought I'm coming back because there was really no way this guy Barack Obama was going to win. And this was sort of maybe a little bit of a cynical play on my part that I was going to go be the chief of staff to Michelle Obama. And then I'd come back and I could say, look, I learned all this stuff and I want a title change and I want more money. And so maybe there was a little of that. So leaving I wasn't totally sort of ripping the Band-Aid because I really did in the back of my mind think that this was a little bit of a folly.
Mm-hmm.
But it was hard and I cried. And this is a man who every Tuesday when he came in, good morning, Mel dear. And then, Shabbat Shalom on a Friday as he was rolling out. And I think for me, it was incredibly important to maintain that relationship because I loved his wife and I love his kids. So I think I did the best I could. And he actually said to me at the end, one of the hardest parts about being a boss is letting people go. But he said, oftentimes you find out that if you let them go, some of them will come back.
And the best bosses will be so supportive.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, as someone now who has had to, either see people you like leave or people you don't like so much leave, I do want that door left open. I want someone to think that maybe I will go back one day.
I don't know that I've ever shared this with you. I graduated college in 2007 and almost signed up to drive around the country for Senator Barack Obama. And it would have put me on a completely different path.
We could have been friends for 17 years.
And the irony is I actually moved to Chicago without a job.
You did. Why Chicago?
Because New York was too big.
Yeah.
And my parents had always said New York is too big. And I think I just internalized that because I grew up in a really small town.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, what's like this next biggest?
No, it's
near?
like, it's perfect.
It's so easy to navigate. But then I just went and got a job at a bank and it put me on this path. But I was there on election night in Grant Park.
You were?
I was. So what could have been?
Yeah, really.
The most consequential election of our lifetime is on November 5th, and our futures are on the ballot. This election season, Argent and When We All Vote are proud to power the Voting Suits You campaign, a nonpartisan initiative to maximize voter participation in the upcoming election in partnership with Michelle Obama's organization, When We All Vote. Dressed in our iconic shade of pink, we want everyone to stand united for women and are asking you to join us in action. So check your voter registration, make a plan, and vote. Because when we all vote, we create the future all women deserve. Visit argentwork.com/voting suits you to learn more and get involved. Okay, so you joined Mrs. Obama.
Yep.
And really, I mean, the Obama family, and you've been with them through some of the biggest transitions. So you join and you're the first person on staff.
Yep.
And how do you step into that job and what are the immediate priorities?
So the very first thing I did for Mrs. Obama was plan spring break for her and her kids
Awesome.
at Legoland. When you're the only staffer, it turns out you're kind of doing a lot of things, and it was just me. So I came at a time where they needed to be planning spring break, and she was going to the Hotel Del in San Diego, and then they were going to go to Legoland, and then they were going to drive up to LA. So I just started using all my contacts from the Hill, and I knew the lobbyist for Disney, this wonderful man, Richard Bates. I'm like, hey, Senator Obama's wife and his kids are going to Disneyland, So that was the first thing I did, was plan spring break. But after that, it was a very gradual progression with her. I think there was a little bit of denial on her part about, she thought she could keep working at the University of Chicago Hospital and campaign. And, I had already worked on several presidentials at this point, and I didn't want to do anything too abrupt. Mm-hmm. And also, I was just beginning to get to know her. Mm-hmm. So we were getting to know each other. So first thing is pull off a good spring break trip, show her she hadn't made a mistake. But then when she got back, then we started, gradually spending 1 or 2 days a week in either Iowa or New Hampshire.
And you're doing everything. You're in the chief of staff role, but you're doing, clearly from planning spring break, but what are the primary responsibilities in that role? And I'm sure it's evolved for you, especially having been in that role now for 17 years. It is.
God, would I do things differently? But, back then, as I'm sort of trying to figure out what is it she needs on these kind of trips, and again, I'm getting to know her, putting together briefings and having her begin to understand the caucus process in Iowa and what that means. In New Hampshire's a primary, it's different. So it's figuring out the right people in our offices in those states who can put together the right kind of briefing. And, this is well before Secret Service. So we always have volunteer drivers, and making sure those people actually know where we're going. Because if you have her on the ground for one day, you're hitting 3 events. She's not flying all the way to New Hampshire and, just going to Nashua and coming home. So it's sort of putting together a cadence of events that makes sense. She's got to figure out a stump speech to start to give. And it, in Iowa, it's really about sort of starting small. And our first events were 15 or 20 people in someone's living room. And she would just sit in a chair much like this and sort of talk to people about who she was. And that was sort of the beginning of her getting her grounding on the campaign trail and figuring out, okay, this is actually how I am connecting with people, and realizing what you've heard her say now a million times, which is we all kind of want the same things for ourselves and for our families. And so it was just sort of harnessing that energy and figuring out the things that work for her and the things that don't work for her, and then putting them in motion. And then we hired the famous KML, Katie McCormick Lellybeld, was our second hire.
Oh, that's great.
And then we sort of became like a threesome, and she was our communications director on the road, and we did everything together. We didn't get another staffer for a year. It was literally the 3 of us.
I imagine that's part of your job too, is figuring out strategy for staffing, right?
It was. And, we spent a lot of time asking for help, realizing that we're basically a 3-person team, and that includes the principal. And sometimes resources are always scarce on a campaign, and there's never enough money. And I think eventually it became clear how potent of a campaigner Michelle Obama was. And they would be foolish not to listen to our requests to get more help, more resources. When we asked to start flying on private planes as opposed to commercial planes, it wasn't because we wanted to be on a private plane, but it was because if we're on a private plane, you can land at regional airports and we can do 5 events in one day instead of 3. And we're not wasting our time driving out to O'Hare or Midway and going through security. Like, you get us on a small plane, but a plane with obviously 2 pilots and 2 engines and the whole thing. And, we can hit a whole corner of Iowa and still be home for her to say goodnight to the girls.
Did you have any missteps in those early days?
Sally.
That's the best part of the story.
There's
for me.
so many things now with the hindsight of all of this that I would totally do differently. First of all, I would have pushed more quickly for the resources. Yeah. And if I wasn't being heard, I should have made more noise, because we all knew what we needed and we weren't getting what we needed.
That was probably across all of you too. I'm sure it was the same for her.
But
same
also,
for Katie,
I felt intimidated, right?
Yeah.
Like whether you're working for the spouse in the campaign or you're even transitioning into the White House, there is inherently this sort of almost second-class citizen feel to it a little bit. And I think, knowing now what I know about how amazing she is and what an asset she was to the campaign and to, the president and the whole thing, I think I would have been more aggressive and more forceful. Luckily, we had an incredible team on the ground in both Iowa and New Hampshire. Our ground game was super strong. So I always knew when we landed in one of these cities that we had these women who were ready to go, and they, jump in the van with us. And we had in Iowa, we always had cards, and we would take notes of who we met and whether or not we got them to commit. And, at the end of the day, we might call the president's team or the then senator's team, like, well, we got 17, committed cards. How many did you get? Or you'd wake up and she would be on the cover of the Des Moines Register or one of the papers and be like, oh yeah, she was above the fold. Where's Senator? So it was good-natured ribbing, but you sort of began to realize by the end she was called the closer, and there was a reason for it.
I think there's also something gendered about that's a through line across all careers, where women, especially earlier in career, are shouldering more of the burden than they should be, and oftentimes not asking for enough. That's especially true in the startup world.
Yes.
Women are asking for exactly what it is they think they need, or a little bit less. And you always need like 75%, 100% more than what you're asking.
And men will ask 12 times 100%. And 10 of the times they'll get it. And then, you also, like, his team was largely male, of course, and our team was 100% estrogen. And there is that dynamic that I didn't speak up enough because I was intimidated by all those guys.
Yes.
100% I was intimidated.
Yeah, we've all been there. I stepped into grad school intimidated, thinking that everyone's smarter than me. And then you step out realizing that it's not the case. So I do think some of that comes from experience, but knowledge is also important. It
takes a while.
Totally.
I mean, I don't know if you felt that way immediately when you left, but it has taken me years to realize what we did was as important as what they did. It was a package deal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're just, I don't know, we have higher expectations of ourselves maybe. And with experience, yes, my confidence grows, but it still happens. Like I think it'll probably continue to happen, but now I have more awareness of it and I'm definitely more aggressive.
That's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's in the back of your mind, and when you're in a moment or an opportunity and you think, I should be speaking up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And asking for more.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear then about, because obviously you won the election.
We won. Oh my God.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the next chapter, that transition, that feeling.
Yeah.
Were you, you won the primary, you won the presidency, you just keep winning.
The whole thing, do you remember what the country felt like? The whole world was surprised.
Being in Grant Park when the election was called was one of those moments where you are living history and you can feel it. And we walked down Michigan Avenue afterwards. It was completely shut off to traffic.
Do you remember how warm it was?
It was beautiful out.
Crazy because it's November in Chicago.
It was perfect. Yeah. I know exactly what I was wearing. I had my big button on, but it was everyone was just celebrating in the streets in a way that was special and historic.
Yep.
So I remember pretty vividly. It was wild.
It was, and my family had come in, which was, very special for me. And the first Black president of the United States. I mean,
and to be living in Chicago, where he's from, was a really spectacular part of that for me and my experience.
And, my boss was always very clear when we did big events, whether they were rallies or whatever, that we always had to have sort of a separate space for the kids, because no kid wants to sit around and watch, returns on TV. So we had gotten a bunch of hotel rooms where we were watching returns, but her whole family was there,
Yes.
And as much as Barack Obama is Chicago, Michelle Obama
totally
is Chicago.
Yes.
And she's got the 60 or 70 family members who, were all a part of all of our local events. And the kids were all running around. We had one room for the adults, and then there was basically the chicken fingers room where all the kids were hanging out and running around. And I don't know how much some of those kids were processing at the moment.
You can't. I don't think. They were really
the girls
young.
were.
They were young.
And then, 2 days later, you fly to Washington, D.C. to meet with the Bushes. Once it starts, and then Michelle Obama's mind is going, okay, doctors, school, packing up the house. We still are going to keep our annual trip to Hawaii to go see, for Christmas. And then all of a sudden you see the wheels turning in her head and you realize, okay, I thought I had just done the hardest thing I've ever done. Not even close. All of a sudden your office has changed because now you're working out of a federal building because you're the president-elect. So we had to dump everything in our campaign headquarters and start going to a totally different place. And then a few months later, we all have to go back to Washington. Now, smart or not, I had never rented out my condo for 2 years because I kept thinking we were going to lose. And I wanted to be able to go home and sleep in my own bed. So I emptied my bank account paying mortgage on an empty condo, but I also had a place to sleep when I got home. So then we all come and we're working out of a different federal building in DC. And, whoever planned the inauguration obviously didn't have children because it's like in the middle of the school year. So Malia and Sasha, they're living out of Blair House and they have to start school in the middle of whatever it is, second and fourth grade. And there was just a lot to do. And we had to pack up the Chicago house. It's an enormous undertaking and you are on fumes already because you've been killing it the last few weeks of the campaign. And there's never a moment to breathe.
Is it daunting though to look at, we just won and now I have to revisit my responsibilities? And is there like a steep learning curve?
I would say less so for me because of my experience on Capitol Hill. I had probably a better sense. We had a very young campaign. So first of all, there's a ton of kids who had sort of like taken leaves of absences from college to come work on our campaign. And they all had to decide, am I going to go back and finish my degree or am I going to go into the administration? And then there was also sort of the more senior level folks who were in the friend group of the Obamas who were also coming. I know it was more of a culture shock for them to move. And there was a lot of grumbling and, sort of complaining about Washington, which wasn't Chicago. And I was sort of like, well, it's okay here.
Yeah, you're probably ready to get back. Yeah.
I was thrilled. My life was in Washington. I'd put it on hold for 2 years to live in Chicago. But I also had a little bit of an edge because at that point, my relationship with Mrs. Obama was so close. There was an understanding that I could continue in the White House doing some of the more personal things that had kept me really fulfilled, things that had to do with the girls, overseeing scheduling, things that had a direct impact on her day-to-day life. I think she had a comfort level with me doing that. And it was certainly in my comfort zone to continue to do those things. And then, there was always a chief of staff who would do the policy and stuff that I had no interest. I had no interest in schlepping over to the West Wing every morning for the 7:30 meeting and, fighting with them about whatever. We're doing an event at 6:15. You guys can't, that wasn't my idea of why I had worked 20 plus years to get into the White House.
We've talked about this a little bit, and I think that trust is the most important thing that you can have.
Yeah.
With anyone that you work with, to be honest. It's really nice to have it in a boss. But I would say on the flip side, it's nice as a boss to have that in people that are, owning such a significant part of their lives.
Absolutely.
Do you know when that trust came into play, or was it just a slow build over time?
I think it's when someone gives up their life and moves to another city and is, living in a rental. And I think she knew at that point, I think it didn't even need to be said in the same way that at the end of the White House, people may find it strange, but she and I never actually had a conversation about me leaving the White House and continuing on with her. It was implicit.
Yeah.
There was no way, after all we had been through for 10 years at that point, that I was going to walk away and just send her off, trying to navigate going back into being a semi-private citizen. And there was no way I was going to leave her. And interestingly enough, like I had my conversations about my new job with the president and not with Mrs. Obama. Like it was a done deal. There was never a particular moment. I think anybody who worked on the campaign, because our campaign was not based in Washington, it wasn't one of those campaigns where people got to go home at night and still be with their families. Everybody who worked on this campaign picked up and moved from somewhere else. And that in and of itself is such a show of faith in the candidate that those were definitely the first people. Like I don't know other White Houses. I can tell you ours was a very young White House because so many of the people were all these young kids who were true believers in Barack Obama. But some of these guys are like 26 years old and they're working at the NSC.
Yes, to see pictures from that era,
yeah.
It's you need to be that young to not sleep and to pull the hours that they're pulling off. But
totally.
Yeah, it's wild to see how youthful they look now.
It was. And they were, I mean, when I was there, I was sort of on the older end of the spectrum of staff. One of our speechwriters, this great young man, Tyler, he had just basically graduated and he was living on someone's couch in Iowa and he would, had written sports stories for the local newspaper. And he's an organizer and he's great. And he comes into the White House and we hire him to be our correspondence director. And he ends up writing speeches for the president. I mean, that's just the trajectory of these of these people.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are the highlights for you of that time in your career, the White House?
Everybody always says it really is like I have a White House family. There are people, and everybody has people like this in their life, but there are people who, you're watching something on the Food Network or something, and you just text someone you haven't talked to in 6 months, and you just pick up. There is the history, the shared experience, the shared sacrifice, and it is a sacrifice to work it is an honor, and it is also a sacrifice to work that hard in the federal government for 8 years. But, these people will always, always, always and forever be in my life. And as we're sort of working with the Obama Foundation and building the campus, one of the things we look forward to the most is opening this campus and having everybody come back and seeing all these people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a family reunion.
Yeah.
Now it's been nearly 8 years that you've not worked in the White House.
Correct.
And you've moved beyond public service. All my friends in public service, you're right. It's such a sacrifice and commitment. They give up a lot to do these jobs.
Yeah.
And they're the biggest jobs in the world.
Yep.
I mean, they're so important.
It's heady stuff, but it's a huge, there are so many different levels of which it is a sacrifice, not just obviously the financial sacrifice for me being someone in their 40s making, a federal government salary.
Yes.
And have only made a federal government salary in my whole life.
Yeah. You're still working alongside Mrs. Obama, but now you've moved into other projects. So Higher Ground Productions, When We All Vote.
Yep.
Talk about the change in your roles and responsibilities.
Could not have seen any of this coming. First of all, I really had no background to be in politics in the first place. As I said, I was an art history major. I didn't have the historical context, but I had the real world context.
Most of us didn't go to class anyway in undergrad. So
well, that's
I feel
right.
like
that's probably true. And when you're an art history major, you go into class at 9 a.m. and they turn out the lights. So duh, we're all going to sleep. We're sort of now the family office of the Obamas, which is different from the foundation office. And I had no background at all in business. And to some extent, a lot of what we do, the first thing they did is they both wrote books. He took a little longer than she did, but we got to work almost immediately on Becoming and realizing as she's writing this, how good this book is going to be. Then we start thinking about a book tour, and then it becomes like an 8-headed thing. The book tour isn't just getting on a plane and dropping into this Barnes & Noble and dropping into this tattered cover. All of a sudden, we're renting sports arenas and convention centers. And the first 22 shows sold out the day they went on sale. So all of a sudden, there's now a phase 2. And it's we have a team of 5 people. And we're undertaking basically, 33 stops, 5 foreign countries, and not just Canada. Like we're going to Europe, and it was just so much. It was so much, and there's so many things that we were all learning along the way. And there's musical selections, and we wanted to do, a film to show people as they're filing in and they're waiting for the show to start. So then we do multiple films. Then you want to do a playlist, and I do believe that we sort of broke the mold for what a book tour could look like. And I think people are doing it now, but I don't know that before Michelle Obama, anyone did it on that scale. I mean, her first show was the United Center in Chicago with Oprah Winfrey. And that was just the beginning.
This speaks to what the chief of staff does, though. I feel like you've touched on it without it's an impossible role to define.
Exactly.
Because you were doing everything and you're stepping into these huge, you're stepping into a book tour, planning a book tour.
And thankfully, we had a bunch of type A women on our staff and everybody sort of could figure out, but I was the chief of staff. If this went bad, it's on me.
If anything goes bad, it's on you.
It's always on me. And I didn't have, the chief of staff like I had in the White House to throw her under the bus and be like, well, talk to Tina. There was no Tina. This is all me. And none of us had done anything like this. Every one of us had come from the White House. So nobody knew how to negotiate with Live Nation or Ticketmaster and figure out how to, have books be shipped all over and VIP section. There's so much that goes into this. It was shockingly overwhelming and harder than anything I'd done in the White House.
When something goes wrong, can you tell me what personality comes out from you?
I'm short and I on a good day, I'm direct. I am extremely direct. And at some point, you're doing this calculus in your mind. You want your team to like you and respect you. And there's other times where you just don't give a shit if your team likes you because something's gone wrong and you have to fix it. And if the nice side of me doesn't come out, okay, that's okay. Well, I'll recover. But I can be extremely direct.
You're the embodiment of this Work Friends franchise that we're building to me, where you're behind the scenes. It's a bit of a nebulous role. You're also very nice, and I think can be somewhat unassuming, but you're clearly a force. I mean, look at your career.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious to hear that side of you because we all have it, and you can't not have it because you're having to just execute at
all the time. And even now, even if we're not on a book tour, I am constantly pushing. I'm sure my team is so sick of getting articles from me. I'm constantly sending articles, or should we be lifting this up on social? We will always be working for the former First Lady of the United States. Always. So nobody should forget that in our office ever, right? She may morph into other areas that are new or different, but from a historical perspective, they are always working for the former First Lady. And to me, we will never put out anything less than 100% in anything that we do at all.
So you've done 2 book tours and
2 book tours.
Companies have popped up, organizations have popped up, and you just figure it out as they come.
One of the ways she and I overlap are we're both very linear in the way we think. And she is not just sort of grabbing at the new shiny thing. She will only do something if it makes sense and feels authentic to her. So, there are initiatives that we took with us from the White House that made sense. One of the things that's most important to her, for example, is mentoring young women and education for young women, because she wouldn't be where she is without that. So the Girls Opportunity Alliance. Something else that was immediately apparent to her when we left was she wanted to put politics behind her. She has never enjoyed politics, but civics and the importance of voting and civic responsibility was something she tasked us with figuring out how to do it in a way that she could continue her messaging, but it wouldn't be political in nature. She didn't want the back and forth and the smallness that politics had become. So that's when it took us, I don't know, a year and a half, 16, 18 months to come up with When We All Vote. But it is an outlet for her to go out and talk to young people and Black and brown voters and disenfranchised voters and remind people how important it is and how much is at stake. And, she's a living embodiment of that.
Yeah, I'd like to dive in more to When We All Vote. So Argent's partnering with When We All Vote this election season. So one of the things that we like to do is leverage our platform where we can to lean into causes that we care about, but also to amplify organizations that are doing the work and that are the experts. I want to hear now in this new role and in this new stage of career, what does your work look like leading into election day? And what has your career taught you about the importance of everyone being politically active?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for your it's a risk. It's a risk for anybody who has a brand, and what you're doing is brave and great.
I don't consider it brave because I think
it's entirely brave.
Thank you. But I think it's what you touched on earlier, which it's authentic to me, and what we're building is an extension of who I am.
Yep.
I also think that I believe so deeply in our country and our democracy and in the need for people to engage with it and show up in the way that we're all expected to, which is just by casting a vote. So,
Look, one of my side dreams when I have some time off is to convince you to run for Congress. That's next. Sally for Congress.
I enjoy behind the scenes. You know this about me. Though Arjun has forced me out.
There is you have multiple lives. This is one stage. We can talk about that, but you are exactly the type of person that I feel like should be in Congress representing constituents, because it's for all of the right reasons that you are doing exactly what you're doing.
Thank you. It's the highest compliment, especially coming from you. So thank you. I'm just going to try and absorb it. Thank you.
So just put that, file that.
You put it there
and
before.
Then we can text about that down the road. I think one of the things that has sort of been a focus for me, and this was even back when we were in the White House and we're getting Mrs. Obama on college campuses and talking all the time, is this sort of, I don't know if kids are learning civics anymore. And it has always been so frustrating to me. I mean, again, I started this whole thing with my internship, not knowing the difference between the White House and the Capitol.
With your brother's internship.
With my brother's internship and my mom's $3,000 down payment for the program. So I get it. I didn't know anything either. But I don't think people understand this continuum of, if you don't vote every time, not just every 4 years, but every time, you are not voting for your senator, who in turn are the people who are confirming Supreme Court justices, who are in turn making all of these decisions that affect a woman's body, who can bake a wedding cake, whether or not people who love each other can be married. There's all sorts of things that have very real world, everyday implications. And if people don't vote, they are ceding that vote to somebody else who is voting, and somebody else is making that decision for you. So people have to understand that it is not just about voting in a presidential year, because that is hugely important, but it is about understanding your responsibility. And there are people all over the world who would kill to be able to vote as safely as we do here in the United States and with the ease that we do. And I will never understand, and I will never stop fighting for people to vote every time there's a ballot for whatever it is.
And it's twofold, right? Making sure that people have access and
Yes.
making sure that they show up.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if somebody doesn't want to go be a poll watcher, I get it. Then find someone and drive them to the polls or help them fill out their registration. There's a million tiny ways you can do it. And then there's, you can get up and you can go to another state where it's going to be a battleground and do something. But people have to be educated and they have to understand what's at stake, because it's so obvious to me what's at stake.
It's so fascinating to just your experience door knocking early days.
Yeah.
Fast forward to here. I do think oftentimes we feel helpless. There was some research that was done that said that women individually feel really helpless, but collectively feel really powerful. And I think it's just having access to information and knowing how to engage.
It breaks my heart that women feel individually, a little helpless. That's heartbreaking to me. We have the power to vote at the ballot box, but also our voices can be heard in so many ways, whether it's through elected office or any number of volunteers. I mean, there's just, right now, I feel like there are so many aspects of a woman's life that are under attack. I don't think I can articulate how frustrating it is for me to hear a bunch of men discussing what I'm going to do with my body.
Don't get me started.
It's shocking to me, and it takes two to tango, and they're walking away, and somebody's telling me what I can and cannot do.
And it's about equal access, too,
Yeah.
for women. And gender equity, we make up the majority of voters in the country.
Yep.
We should be, I think that our politicians should reflect the same demographics, which they don't. So, and I think women oftentimes this is just true in a patriarchy, but we're encountering so many barriers and obstacles along the way. So for any woman to have success, for her to break through, that she's been through a lot of shit. And I wanted to build Argent to both offer representation and model what work can look like, because I didn't grow up with that and I didn't know what career, paths were available to me. But it's also about showing this collective force and lifting each other up and continuing to ensure that everyone has equal access, because we all don't aspire to the same things, but we should be allowed to do whatever it is that we want to, and our gender shouldn't hold us back. I think to take it one step further and then to show up and vote and ensure that our rights are protected. Okay, so you have been out of public service now for quite some time, but what advice do you have for people who aspire to have a career like yours?
If you can afford to do it, I would say as soon as you can in college, do an internship and put your toe in the water and figure out, is this something I want to do? For me, with my internship, I think there's different things that you can do. I am not, as I said earlier, I'm not a policy person. I never wanted to do legislation. I didn't want to sit in committee hearings all day, but I like politics. And they do need brains like mine, which are process-oriented, organizational. I do charts. I take in data. That's my superpower. And there are plenty of jobs like that too. So I would say to anybody who's interested, especially right now, and I've talked to a lot of my friends send their college-age kids to talk to me when they're trying to figure out what they want to do. And if you have the ability, to do an internship or to volunteer in your congressperson's state office, or if you can get on a presidential campaign. To me, that is the way to figure out most quickly if this is the right life for you. And there's all different kinds of things you can do, but getting on a presidential campaign is so eye-opening. And there's lots of different jobs. You can move around from state to state if you don't mind living out of a suitcase, or you can sort of embed in a state and be in a state office. And for me, it was that first internship that I thought I was just coming because I wanted to hang out in Georgetown and go to clubs all the time. But it turned out this was really something I could be passionate about.
Both can be true.
And both can be true at the same time. And you can still get up and go to work after you've been out drinking.
Before I let you go, I have one more quick question. Who is your best work friend?
I have a million work. I think I would say my oldest work friend is a woman named Suzanne, who was in my first job on the Hill. She was so glamorous. You would love her because, you know, one of the things about Argent is if you feel better, in many ways, you'll be better at your job because you feel better and you have more confidence. This woman, this was the 90s, and she would come to work and I just wanted to be her. She would wear like a t-shirt and a cotton skirt. And, you know, back then we were shoving shoulder pads and everything. And I worshiped her, and she became a dear friend. She's still a close friend to this day. But she was the package to me. She was so smart. She'd gone to BU. She was on the committee staff for the congressman we worked for, but she brought it every day, and she wore sky-high heels, and she just, I don't know, she showed me, and she was also kind all the time, and everybody loves and respects her. So she was my first role model in an office. And I think it was the best way to start out, is seeing how Suzanne carried herself in the work environment.
What's she doing now?
Now she is a lobbyist. She's a transportation lobbyist, but she owns her own firm.
Go Suzanne.
She owns 2 houses. She's got a house in D.C. and she has a beach house in Delaware. She wired it. She absolutely wired it.
Okay, my favorite part of the interview. Before you go, we have a few would you rather questions. Would you rather stay organized digitally or only write everything down with a pen and paper?
Write everything down.
Same.
Write everything down. In the same way that I can't even read a book on a Kindle. I have to physically hold the book and feel the paper. And yeah.
I'm still offended by Kindles. I just can't get into it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Would you rather take a meeting at 8 a.m. on a Monday or 4 p.m. on a Friday?
4 p.m. on a Friday.
Asked at 4 p.m. on a Friday.
There's still there's so much life left to live on a Friday night, but I can't get out. Like now, the mornings are precious. Like you got to get up, you got to have some tea, got to play on your phone.
Do you think this has changed? Do you think earlier in your career you would have answered that differently?
I think I have earned staying in bed until 8 o'clock in the morning. After working on Capitol Hill and in the White House for 20 plus years, I have earned my mornings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I'm taking the early morning meeting.
Not me.
Would you rather write a great piece of feedback or receive a great piece of feedback?
I think I'd rather give good feedback to someone.
Would you rather be the oldest person in the office or the youngest?
Oldest. What about you?
I could go either way on this one. I think I enjoy being the youngest.
Oh, you do?
Mm-hmm. Would you rather have coworkers who type very loudly or speak very loudly on the phone?
Well, having sat next to someone who's like sitting next to thunder and lightning, I'm going to go with typing. Loud is a lot.
I also have AirPods, so if something's really irritating me, I'm just going to go.
Yeah, I don't think we could have gotten away with wearing AirPods in the White House, but
fair.
Yeah.
Would you rather be late to a meeting where you're presenting or where your boss is presenting?
Neither. I don't want neither one of those scenarios should ever happen. I was once late to a meeting with my boss, and I got in, and then a little while later, I got a text from her. She's like, "Hey, where were you?" And it was probably the only meeting I've ever been late to in 17 years. She's like, "Hey, where were you?" So let's not do that again.
I'd rather be late when they're presenting, for the record.
Ugh.
Because if I'm presenting, it's going to just go off the rails.
Yeah.
You don't want to show up just hot mess. Everybody's waiting for you, looking at you. This is a fun question, though, because of who your boss is.
Yeah.
Like, that makes it more fun.
Yeah.
Would you rather accidentally leave your mic unmuted or your camera on?
Jesus, Sally. I don't have an answer to that.
It's got to be camera.
I guess.
I think.
I don't know. I talk a lot of smack.
Exactly. But if your camera's on and you're muted.
If the camera's on, let's do that.
And lastly, would you rather vote by mail, vote early, or on election day?
So for presidential, I have to vote in person. I have to stand in line for a presidential election year. I need the experience of being with fellow voters, waiting in line. But for off election years, I do it by mail. But I will be going in person.
I do both, but voting in person for presidential, I agree, is a very special experience. Yes.
I want all of it. I want the whole day. It is a national holiday when you're voting for president.
Yes, and our kids' school would agree with you.
Yeah.
Which Dave and I always we take issue with because we're like, but we have to vote as well.
Yeah.
Mel, thanks for being
here. Thanks for having me. This is a fun conversation.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, could have talked forever. Thanks for listening to Work Friends, a podcast from Argent. Listen and follow on all podcast platforms and subscribe to the Argent YouTube channel for more clips and bonus content. Plus, email your work questions and dilemmas at workfriends@argentwork.com for a chance to have one of our amazing guests weigh in with advice. I'm Sally Christensen, and we'll see you next time. Work Friends. Work Friends is produced by Gina Marinelli with editing by Justin Kropp. Our theme music is by Karina De Piano and Melanie Naima.